Hello and welcome everybody to this online event with which we are marking this year's Human Rights Day. My name is Maja Ladić and I'm a researcher and project manager at the Peace Institute. I will be moderating this online event. In the last 2 years, we have organized several public events within the Think Peace series to talk about peace, what is peace, and how to achieve and maintain peace without starting new wars. It's been almost 3 years since the war in Ukraine started. It's been more than a year since the last war in Palestine started. More than 13 years since the war in Syria. And I could go on and on mentioning all the wars and conflicts going on around the world. Also, yesterday's International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of Crime of Genocide and of the prevention of this crime seems quite ironic as we continue to watch the genocide happening in Gaza. Similarly ironic seems the Never Again slogan, which has been used so many times by now, and yet there is always another again. However, perhaps latest developments in Syria bring hope not only to Syrians, but also to others. It is important to raise our voices and to use any opportunity we have to demand peace and to talk about the importance of peace. Today, since it is the International Human Rights Day, the title of our event is Human Right to Peace. And we are very happy to have with us, at least virtually, Jurij Šeljaženko, a peace activist from Ukraine. Jurij is a peace scholar and human rights defender. He holds a PhD in jurisprudence. He's active in several local and international peace networks, and he also runs a peace education project, Civilians School of Pacifism. Regardless of his condemnation of the Russian army's attack on Ukraine, the Ukrainian authorities are prosecuting him for his pacifist appeals and defense of the right to conscientious objection to military mobilization.
Dear friends, greetings from Kyiv. I am thankful to the Peace Institute and delighted to have this conversation today and to celebrate Human Rights Day with you. I am prepared to shed light on today's topic, that is war in Ukraine and human right to peace. Despite, as you probably know, we have huge problems with a light here in Kyiv. After Russian bombing that destroyed half of Ukrainian energy infrastructure. I have here a fully charged portable electric station in case if electricity will be turned off during our meeting, and I will use it for ensuring that we can continue. So I will turn on my slides now. One moment. To add some humor and start my presentation a bit provocatively, I must warn you that you have here today, in my humble person, a speaker from a country that awkwardly abstained from voting for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, because Ukraine at that time was ruled by communists who had very low opinion of such a bourgeois luxuries as human rights. And we didn't got rid fully of this bellicose communist human rights nihilism even after declaring independence. Because Ukraine also abstained from voting for the Declaration on the Right to Peace on 2016. I felt this nihilism many times on my skin. Advocacy of peace by peaceful means in Ukraine is such a taboo that when I wrote a letter to President Zelensky asking for ceasefire, diplomacy, nonviolent resistance to Russian aggression, and fair treatment of conscientious objectors to military service, I was falsely accused in so-called justification of Russian aggression. My flat here was searched, my computer and smartphone seized. Imagine such an absurd a pacifist was placed under house arrest and could be sentenced to 5 years of prison for alleged apology of war in anti-war statement that clearly condemns Russian aggression. To increase this craziness, Security Service of Ukraine was prepared to charge me in defending human right to conscientious subjection to military service under an article of criminal code dealing with interference in military affairs, punishable up to 8 years of prison. Fortunately, they abandoned this ludicrous charge. Maybe someone said them that it is not a crime to defend human rights, but their usual attitude seems to think otherwise. For these reasons, I might look as a dissident talking today about human rights and a right to peace and a right to refuse to kill in the country with a long record of disrespecting these rights. But for a small relief, Ukraine 2 years ago co-sponsored a resolution entitled Conscientious Subjection to Military Service in Human Rights Council, and Ukraine accepted consensual adoption by the United Nations General Assembly in 1999 resolution Declaration on Culture to Peace that recognizes necessity of education, especially human rights education, that promotes respect for life, gives knowledge and skills vital for ending of violence and practice of nonviolence in politics, economy, media, and daily life. So Ukraine is not hopeless. And I believe Slovenia too is a part of this worldwide consensus of developing culture of peace, commitment to peaceful settlement of conflicts, and protection of human rights according to United Nations Charter and human rights treaties. Now let's see how it must work according to international law. Human rights are basic needs that must be respected and satisfied to avoid violence, prevent any harm. According to preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. If people are denied in freedom, they may rebel against oppressors and aggressors. Apart from the declaration, there are binding human rights treaties, such as International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and European Convention on Human Rights. Both Ukraine and Slovenia are parties to them. Declaration on the Right to Peace says that everyone has the right to enjoy peace, such that all human rights are promoted and protected, and development is fully realized. Preamble to the declaration says that peace is not only the absence of conflict, but also requires a positive, dynamic, participatory process, where dialogue is encouraged and conflicts are solved in a spirit of mutual understanding and cooperation, and socio-economic development is ensured. A culture of peace means nonviolent way of life, relevant ideas and norms of behavior, including respect to all forms of light. I will release my beloved creature. Her name is Maska. Now, respect to all life. Education, especially regarding human rights, is essential to build a culture of peace. UNESCO recommendation on education for peace, human rights and sustainable development gives up-to-date guidelines how to educate people for living in peace. Conscientious objection to military service is recognized by Human Rights Council and European Court of Human Rights as a human right inherent to freedom of conscience, since coercion to undergo compulsory military service and punishment of conscientious objectors might impair freedom to have a pacifist religion or belief. War is the most obvious example how human rights are violated. As we say in War Resistance International, war is a crime against humanity. Therefore, I am determined not to support any kind of war and to strive for the removal of all causes of war. Invading Ukraine, Russia violated not only United Nations Charter that requires peaceful resolution of international disputes, but also violated the right to peace of millions of people on both sides of the front line. That means further grave violations, including numerous deaths and destroyed cities. Cold winter brings new losses, occupation, cruelty, permanent assaults of Russian rockets, bombs, shells, and killer drones. And people are freezing in darkness due to power shortages. You see at this slide a photo of fire after Russian shelling of residential quarters in Zaporizhia. That happens on 6 December, 4 days before, and 10 people were killed, including 2 children. There could be no justification for internationally condemned Russian aggression. And hardly anyone sane believes in Putin's imperialist fairy tale that Ukrainian people are part of the Russian nation, somehow turned against their big brother by a conspiracy of evil West's Nazi stooges. However, there is a lack of institutional safeguards of the right to peace on national and international levels. Prevailing militarism allows to wage wars for political power and economic benefit. When everyone adopts the flawed logic of wanting peace prepare for war, everyone has an excuse for aggression. They were preparing to war with us, pretending it is defense, so we were forced to make a preemptive strike for self-defense. That's why if you want peace, you need to prepare for peace. After more than 1,000 days of Russian full-scale invasion to Ukraine, we have more than 1 million casualties. 400,000 casualties on Ukrainian side, estimated 700,000 casualties on Russian side. And Russia fired this new hypersonic long-range ballistic missile on Ukrainian Dnipro city with clear nuclear threat. Russian nuclear blackmail violates human right to peace and endangers human right to life. And apart of direct damage of Russian aggression, such as deaths, injuries, captivity, torture, destruction of cities, lack of means for living, there is indirect damage, trauma caused by the aggression. And this trauma makes our government to adopt harsh policies. And it also makes the public to have very, how to say it politely, not nice sentiments to Russians and to current situation. And that includes treatment of people not willing to fight. Hundreds of thousands of people quietly refuse to participate in war and preparations to war in Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. For example, in Ukraine, there is famous internationally known conscientious objector, Vitaly Alexeyenko. He is a Christian pacifist, and he was imprisoned for his conscientious objection to military service. After our human rights defending campaign, Supreme Court released him from prison and ordered retrial. During retrial, he was sentenced again, this time to suspended sentence, probation, not incarceration. Prosecutor asks Supreme Court to imprison him again. This case is under new consideration in Supreme Court. And Vitaly went to court and he said he is true to the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And he said there is a way to resist Russian aggression non-violently. For example, during the war, people need to have opportunity to exchange letters, parcels, congratulate each other with holidays, and in such way we maintain social cohesion, unity of Ukrainian people. Communication must work even during the war. So since the state not offered him alternative non-military service as prescribed by the Constitution of Ukraine, but not observed on practice, he found himself some sort of alternative service, a way how to serve, how to contribute to protection of Ukraine from Russian aggression. He became a postman, and he delivers these letters, these parcels, these pensions to people. This life story shows that conscientious objectors are participating in nonviolent resistance to Russian aggression, but our government is not recognizes it. And our army pretends that conscientious objectors could have alternative service in the army, serve in the army without bearing weapons. They actually said it in courts, but it is a lie, because military statutes requires of every member of military personnel to carry weapons. One Baptist agreed to service without weapons as he was promised. And of course, when he was conscripted, they ordered him to bear weapons, to wear military uniform. He refused, and he was charged in disobedience, which is much more grave crime than draft evasion, and punished more severely. So, unfortunately, our army deceives people, tries to force conscientious objectors to serve in army by deception, hoping that under coercion their religious beliefs could change. And of course, it is not the case. Tens of thousands of people desert both in Russia and in Ukraine. Due to lack of legal ways to stay aside the war, corruption and uncertainty, people flee abroad. Ukrainians usually receive humanitarian protection. Refugees from Russia and Belarus could be repatriated despite a threat of punishment for exercising their right to object to participation in an internationally condemned war of aggression. In Russia, anti-war activists and conscientious objectors are declared foreign agents, fined and imprisoned. In Belarus, Olga Karach, leader of anti-war movement Our House, was tried in absentia and sentenced to 12 years of prison, while Lithuania denies her asylum request. So he could be repatriated to Belarus and sent to jail. Russia imposes military registration, detain and torture men on occupied territories of Ukraine, forcing them to serve in occupying army contrary to international humanitarian law. In Ukraine, as I said, army denies in legal recognition of conscientious objectors. Tens of them are sentenced to prison. Constitutional Court of Ukraine considers complaint of a prisoner of conscience Dmytro Zelinsky, who asked to recognize unconstitutional some norms in law of Ukraine on alternative non-military service, allowing to suspend right to alternative service during the war. It is indeed contradicts international human rights obligations of Ukraine. Our government closed borders for all men in age from 18 to 60 and 6 ways to send them to trenches. People are stopped at streets and arbitrarily detained in military units. Subjected to threats and beating, some died in custody of military recruiters. So, to protect human right to think freely, to live freely, just a right to life, we need to end the war. Question is how to do it when there is very different positions on both sides. Russian position is that Ukraine needs to give up NATO membership aspirations. Putin said he fears that NATO's and especially United States nuclear warheads could very quickly fly from Ukrainian territories to Moscow for 4 minutes. And Russia insists that Russia occupied territories must be recognized as Russian territories by Ukraine. Russia demands territorial concessions. And Russia demands change in identity politics of Ukraine. Because Ukraine took a lot of efforts to develop culture of our national citizenship, separate from Russian culture, independent Ukrainian culture. And in Russia, they used to believe that Ukrainians are just part of Russian people. So Ukrainian position is that NATO membership is the only security guarantee that could deter Russian imperialism, their attitude to see Ukrainians in their sphere of influence, and therefore attempts to forcibly place are under their control. Ukrainian position is that only NATO membership could prevent any further incursions and invasions. And Ukrainian position is no concessions could be possible regarding territory and identity politics. Talking about NATO membership, which is non-negotiable position according to President Zelensky and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the only possible point of bargain could be that Ukraine agreeing for being invited to NATO without Article 5 guarantees regarding Russia-occupied territories, and Ukraine agrees for a while to pursue diplomatic, not military, regaining the Russia-occupied lands. There is a recent proposal by Ukrainian Quakers, Religious Society of Friends. It is a proposal to have ceasefire as soon as possible on Christmas, for example. It is nuclear neutrality of Ukraine, and nuclear neutrality means accession to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a new progressive mechanism how to free the world from nuclear weapons which are a threat to survival of the humankind. Proposal is that NATO must allow nuclear neutrality within alliance, so any member of NATO could join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and both Russia and Ukraine, of course, will need to develop peace education, to transform societies for nonviolent coexistence, for having reason, truth and love, justice, instead of hatred and violent attitude toward each other. This proposal came in ministries during meetings for worship among Ukrainian friends and was recently elaborated in an article at website worldbeyondwar.com. It is a network of war abolishers and peace educators. You could scan QR code on the slide and read it. And by the way, I would like to say how grateful I am for Friends World Committee for Consultation, Europe and Middle East section, Clerkle section, Michael Eccles, Peace and Service Network, and our friend Mikhail Elisbarashvili, who helps to organize this network. He's a Georgian friend, and they have now a very hard time. I'm helpful to Friends for Spiritual Support and Pastoral Care. A clerk in Central European Yearly Meeting, Pavel Milka, member of Prague meeting, told me he teaches Czech language, a Ukrainian woman who have a brother fighting for Russian side and a son fighting for Ukrainian side. So this war divides families, and it is of course tragic. I'm grateful to elder from Slovenia, Jasmine Piercy. She holds me in the light. I'm grateful to Jasmine for carrying emails and for sharing knowledge in Woodbrook Learning Center. So what logic underpins this Quaker peace proposal? Like Slovenia, Ukraine chose to seek security and prosperity of our nation in the European Union and NATO. The Cold War epoch NATO choice was controversial, but people made democratic decisions and nobody presented any persuasive alternative. Russia is so hostile to NATO that Russia resorts to nuclear blackmail in response to Ukraine's convergence with the alliance. Of course, Ukraine will never surrender territories and sovereign right to choose independently our partnerships in international relations. So such sort of Russia's ultimatums are no-go. But assuming that Russia is genuinely worried that United States nukes could be placed in Ukraine, why not pledge to avoid it and make a step towards peace, towards nuclear disarmament? Suppose that Ukraine would decide to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, thus being able to join NATO, but legally bound not to participate in nuclear sharing missions in nuclear drills regularly held by NATO, not placing any nuclear-capable military bases, and so on in Ukraine. So United States nukes will never threaten Moscow from Ukrainian territory. On the other hand, the logic of nuclear deterrence will allow Russia to attack with nuclear weapons, will not allow to attack with nuclear weapons non-nuclear Ukraine. This is some sort of crazy rules of so-called nuclear deterrence. And these crazy rules actually have a bit of common sense. Nuclear states should not attack non-nuclear states. Joint conventional forces of NATO countries will be able to push back any further Russian attacks on Ukraine if needed. But knowing that fact, Kremlin, of course, would not dare to attack again. Destroying post-Soviet nuclear stockpile and joining non-proliferation treaty 3 decades ago, Ukraine already contributed to survival of humankind, prevention of nuclear world war, able to kill all life on the planet. Kiev's voluntary commitment to the nuclear neutrality, if approved by Moscow, could be a key for peace in Ukraine and a way to global nuclear de-escalation, and thus protection of all human right to peace. Also, aspiring to become a first NATO member who joined Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, at least negotiating that, Ukraine could perform its obligations to make good faith efforts for complete nuclear disarmament, according to Article 6 of Non-Proliferation Treaty, and engage NATO members and their geopolitical competitors into compliance with their similar obligations. They also must make good faith efforts for complete nuclear disarmament, according to Non-Proliferation Treaty, which both non-nuclear states, such as currently Ukraine, and nuclear states, nuclear club, they are parties to Non-Proliferation Treaty today. These negotiations for nuclear disarmament could improve reputation of NATO. Nuclear neutrality, tolerance to nuclear neutrality could improve reputation of NATO. It could completely change global security architecture, making NATO less threatening, less dangerous to survival of humankind actor. And it could give hope that one day members of the nuclear club, among allies and rivals of NATO, will stop threatening the world with nuclear apocalypse. Ironically, for the sake of so-called security, how these nuclear stockpiles, which could kill all life on the planet, will benefit for security, it is MAD idea, and actually MAD is acronym for mutually assured destruction, this so-called logic of nuclear so-called deterrence. Other necessary measure needed to stop the war and curtail post-Soviet militarism that exacerbates it is improvement of peace culture, starting from human rights education and further development of democratic institutions. It is especially important to protect fully the human right to conscientious objection to military service in any time, especially in wartime, as institutional safeguards of existence of peace activists and movements, peace thinkers and writers, peace entrepreneurs and benefactors, peace academies and churches, able to mobilize people for effective nonviolent resistance to aggressors and oppressors, maintaining dialogue and social cohesion, caring for needy and suffering, advocating sanity, morality, and diplomacy, preserving democracy from self-destruction in the fog of war. These policy prescriptions could be derived not only from urgent necessity to remove from power in Russia the Putin's criminal warmongering regime and resurrect democracy, but also from a need to stop militarist brinkmanship in Ukraine with persecution of peace activists and human rights defenders like myself, with tortures and imprisonments applied to conscientious objectors in doomed to fail attempts to make them soldiers, with reckless hints that Ukraine could make atomic bomb if not provided with some miraculous amount of destructive capabilities to defeat Russia. Though officially such high-level winking and informal leaks without intentions to go nuclear are wisely denied. Proposed nuclear neutrality in package with NATO membership that President Zelensky and most of Ukrainian people, according to polls, could consider a victory of Ukraine, could be placed on the table in both Russia and Ukraine if Russia and Ukraine will be ready to negotiate in good faith how Russian war of aggression will end without injustice to invaded Ukraine and with credible security guarantees. For now, there is a lack of willing to negotiate on both sides. During the presidency of Slovenia in the United Nations Security Council, a high-level debate was held dedicated to leadership for peace. Ukraine pledged to seek no compromise with the aggressor. Slovenia also emphasized that Russian aggression must not be allowed, but urged to uphold the United Nations Charter by placing common interests above national interests, and expressed aspiration to be an honest broker, a bridge and consensus builder. 95 signatories to the joint communique on a peace framework in the outcome of the Summit on Peace in Ukraine suggest that Slovenia is not alone in the leadership for peace. Due to unique leverage of the United States, if President-elect Donald Trump is serious about negotiating peace in Ukraine, the push for negotiations could become decisive. But fairness of such negotiations is important for just and sustainable peace. Thus, the option of nuclear neutrality I propose, Quakers propose, could be helpful in the cause of peace in Ukraine with respect to Euro-Atlantic aspirations of our people. It could be helpful to our fragile democracy, to strengthen it, and it will show that such negotiations are serving human right to peace, protecting humankind from horrible risks of nuclear escalation. Current state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and peace movements could propose also nuclear neutrality for Ukraine and tolerance of nuclear neutrality in NATO as a way to reconcile with Russia. They could remind that at the summit in Rio de Janeiro, leaders of G20, the 20 biggest world economies, in their declaration committed to a world free of nuclear weapons. If NATO will allow members to be parties to Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or to say shortly, Nuclear Ban Treaty, not only Ukraine, but also traditionally peaceful countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland might consider nuclear neutrality within NATO, decreasing risks of nuclear war or any war in Europe. Russia already tolerates nuclear neutrality of allies and partners. For example, Kazakhstan is party to Nuclear Ban Treaty, and it is also a member of Russia-led Collective Security Treaty Organization. Mongolia is also a party to Nuclear Ban Treaty. So, since Russia tolerates nuclear neutrality, it would be proportional for NATO countries to adopt the same policy. And now we are coming to another important part of this puzzle, peace education, that is necessary to end wars. Apart from direct damage from Russian aggression against Ukraine, there are also anti-democratic tendencies and a lot of mutual allegations in sowing ethnic hatred, in developing nationalism and imperialism, sowing hatred to the enemy, to the language of enemy, to the culture of enemy, through the official propaganda, both in Russia and Ukraine. To say bluntly, both sides falsely or at least exaggeratedly claim that other side is ruled by Nazi, in frantic appeal to World War II epoch propaganda to justify the repugnant war to the total victory at any cost, and the world may burn in hell. So this similarity between the aggressor and the victim is no excuse for Russian aggression. It seems that some sort of peaceful transformations in both societies is needed for genuine reconciliation in the future. Both knowledge and faith could be helpful on that way of transformations. Ukrainian Quakers, Religious Society of Friends of Ukraine, and other pacifists hope that mainstream churches shamelessly blessing war and militarism could be turned to light with the time by spreading peaceful religious worldviews and secular humanist pacifism. We launched in Ukraine the School of Pacifism, Free Civilians, educating people about nature and practices of genuine peace. And when this project will be developed enough, we have plans to assist Russian friends in the creation of a similar school. Free Civilians School of Pacifism is aimed at the development of peaceful planetary citizenship and worldview. It offers 5 lectures: nature of pacifism, right to peace, right to conscientious objection, nonviolent protection of peace, and organization of peaceful future. The first lecture, Nature of Pacifism, explains that pacifism is a peaceful way of life, readiness to resolve disputes peacefully, and in narrow sense, a conviction that war, the mass killing, is unacceptable, especially unacceptable to resolve disputes because it is not resolved, it only exacerbates disputes. Peace is defined as dynamics of life free from violence, from infliction of harm by any means. Also, the first lecture elaborates a concept of conflict and the need to keep all conflicts in win-win phase, not escalate to win-lose phase and lose-lose phase. When participants of conflict hate and destroy each other, and they are just falling into an abyss. It explains development of different forms of knowledge on peace in spheres of religion, philosophy, and science. And it introduces practical work for peace. Practical work in peace movements and international institutions of peace. It mentions that Jacques Novikov, a delegate from Ukrainian city of Odessa, participated in 1901 in International Peace Congress in Glasgow, where the term pacifism was coined, and explains his beliefs that development of transport, communications, and industry brings the world peace closer. Among additional materials to the course, in the School of Pacifism Free Civilians, there is a collection of quotes on peace from secular humanist and religious sources, from Christian, Islamic, Judaic, Buddhist, Vedic, and other traditions. It includes also a quote of an atheist pacifist, Bertrand Russell: "Love is wise, hatred is foolish." I am coming to conclusion. If you're, being a Quaker, I explain historical role of friends in development of popular understandings of peace, and I added to the collection elements of the Quaker peace testimony. And some students joined my effort to set up Quaker meeting in Ukraine. It is only natural when people feel that instead of Antichrist Patriarch of Moscow worshipping Putin's war of aggression and nuclear warheads, and Ukrainian Council of Churches worshipping NATO, calling for military engagement, we need to create a peace church, worshipping in the spirit of truth and love, according to commandments of our Lord Jesus Christ, given in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are peacemakers, love your enemy, and so on. The second lecture of my free Civilians School of Pacifism, dedicated to the right to peace, explains that jurisprudence is a system of knowledge and practices of transforming reality from what it is to what it ought to be, to achieve justice, to ensure common good and satisfy all reasonable individual needs. Since peace is a need of every human and every healthy community, it is a human right that must be observed voluntarily and, in case of deviations, enforced in peaceful ways. Need of institutional arrangements to implement right to peace is discussed, and historic role of states is mentioned, but of course states not only ended such things as blood feud, but also state sometimes abuses power, use force not proportionately, and new institutions of international peace with central role of United Nations is introduced and underlined. So the lecture encouraged to study United Nations Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Necessity of the world governance based on inclusive democracy, nonviolent dialogue and conflict resolution is underlined, and historical experience of fallen empires who tried to conquer the world is mentioned to show that militarism causes grave mistakes that should not be repeated. In conclusion, I will reiterate that peace, not war, is the norm of human life. War is an organized mass murder, and our duty is that we should not kill each other. In the world where everybody will refuse to kill, there will be no wars. This long-term vision of a world without wars is needed to protect human right to peace by nonviolent actions, such as diplomacy, advocacy, education, solidarity, dialogue, mediation, as well as protest, conscientious objection, civil disobedience, etc. Peaceful future needs institutional reforms towards nonviolent governance and management, so that politics, economics, science and technology will work for peace, not war, to liberate future generations from the yoke of war. People must learn how to resist aggressions and tyrannies without bloodshed, applying hundreds of known effective tactics of nonviolent action. People must respect and try to understand, not demonize the others, the neighbors. Culture of peace consists of small but important things, like words in national anthem. I know that anthem of Slovenia says, "No more shall foes but neighbors be," compared to Ukrainian anthem, "Our enemies shall perish like the dew in the sun." Some people may say that with ugly neighbors like Russia, this difference is understandable, but we are not choosing neighbors, and everyone have ugly ones. So we are also not always behave nice enough to others. So it depends on our own attitude, how to deal with them peacefully. Ukraine, as well as Slovenia, chose NATO security guarantee, but it is a militarist institution of the past that needs reforms for peaceful future. Both Ukraine and Slovenia in the past were places of conferences of great powers deciding on the world order. Remember the Congress of Laibach. Remember the Yalta Conference. But our peoples, the peoples willing to live in peace and having a right to peace, were hardly heard at those conferences that took place at our lands. We suffered from wars in result of controversies in arrangements between greedy emperors, between militant populists behind closed doors. Learning from this mistake, we must insist that any new arrangements and any reforms of old arrangements must respect the need of our peoples in sustainable peace. To end the war in Ukraine, the Russian war of aggression, we need a transformative solution, changing the world for better, not surrendering the world to madness of competing great power bullies. We need peace through reason and love, not peace through strength and hate. Any peace plans for Ukraine and the world must contribute to the long-term vision, like the proposed nuclear neutrality deal that could end the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine and de-escalate Russian-NATO conflict. Only way to this end is a prohibition of nuclear weapons. I will end my presentation with the words of a poem of Ukrainian writer Ivan Franko, quoted in Ukrainian Vision of Peace, adapted by Ukrainian pacifist movement. Clean skies are proudly azure when bloodshed of inhuman war is ceased and peace endure. Sorry for being might be a little too long. Thank you for attention, and I will gladly answer any questions.
Thank you, Yuri.